Natalie Rivers had learned to breathe through grief, but she had never learned to live through it. And as she stood in the community garden on that bright September morning with dirt under her fingernails and tears threatening to spill, she wondered if a woman could plant enough flowers to fill the hole in her heart. 3 years had passed since the accident that took Marcus. 3 years of waking up alone, of cooking dinner for one, of finding his reading glasses in random places around the house and clutching them to her chest like a lifeline. She was 32 years old and felt ancient, hollowed out, a shell of the vibrant woman she had been when her husband was alive. The garden had become her refuge, the only place where she felt like she could breathe without the weight of everyone's pitying stares pressing down on her shoulders. She was kneeling beside a bed of late-blooming roses when she heard footsteps on the gravel path behind her. The community garden was usually empty this early on a Thursday morning, which was exactly why she came at this time. Solitude was easier than small talk, easier than the inevitable questions about how she was doing, if she was seeing anyone yet, if she had thought about moving on. "Excuse me," a deep voice said, and Natalie turned to see a man standing a few feet away, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that was slightly too long and eyes that looked as tired as she felt. He wore expensive jeans and a simple black shirt that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget, but there was something disheveled about him, something raw. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm looking for plot 27. I was told it's somewhere in this section." Natalie sat back on her heels and pointed toward the far corner. "Third row, end plot, the one with the wooden markers. Thank you." He didn't move, though, just stood there looking at the garden beds like he had forgotten why he came. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the shadow of stubble on his jaw, the way his hands were shoved deep in his pockets as if he didn't know what else to do with them. "Are you okay?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted it. She hated when people asked her that. Why was she inflicting it on a stranger? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Not of each other, but of something shared, something understood without words. "No," he said simply. "But I'm here anyway." Natalie nodded slowly. "That's something." "Is it?" He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know what I'm doing. My sister signed me up for this plot 6 months ago, and I've been paying for it without ever coming. She finally threatened to drag me here herself if I didn't show up. Sounds like a good sister. She is." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Too good, probably. She worries." Natalie stood, brushing dirt from her knees. She was wearing her oldest jeans and a faded blue shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup, no pretense. This man looked at her like she was a normal person, not a tragedy, and something about that made her want to keep talking. "Do you know anything about gardening?" "Absolutely nothing," he admitted. "I can barely keep a cactus alive." "Well, cacti are actually pretty temperamental if you overwater them," Natalie said. "Maybe you're just better suited to something else." She gestured to her own plot, which was bursting with color despite the late season. "What kind of space are you working with?" He tilted his head toward the corner plot. "Want to come see? I could use some advice, and you seem like you know what you're doing." Every instinct told Natalie to politely decline, to retreat back into her safe bubble of solitude. But there was something about this man, something in the way he looked lost and found at the same time, that made her feet move forward. "I'm Natalie," she said as they walked. "Daniel." He held out his hand, and when she shook it, his grip was warm and solid. "Daniel Lawson." The name tickled something in the back of her mind, but she couldn't place it. They reached his plot, which was completely barren except for a few stubborn weeds pushing through the soil. Someone had clearly prepared it at some point, tilling the earth and marking the borders, but nothing had been planted. Blank slate, Daniel said, staring at it. I don't even know where to start. Natalie crouched down and ran her fingers through the soil. The earth is good here. It's not too late to plant some cold weather vegetables if you want something practical. Kale, spinach, lettuce, or you could do bulbs for spring flowers. What would you do? She looked up at him. I do flowers, but I'm biased. I like growing things just because they're beautiful, not because they're useful. Flowers it is, then. Daniel crouched beside her, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something earthier, more real. Will you help me? Now, unless you have somewhere else to be. Natalie thought about her empty house, the freelance graphic design work waiting on her computer that she would probably procrastinate on, until the last minute anyway. I don't, she said quietly. They spent the next 2 hours working side by side. Natalie drove to the garden center down the street and returned with flats of tulip and daffodil bulbs, a bag of bone meal, and a few perennials that would provide structure. Daniel paid for everything without blinking, pulling out a black credit card that definitely confirmed her suspicion that he had money. But he didn't act like it. He got his hands dirty, following her instructions carefully, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested in learning. Why flowers? He asked as they planted the last of the bulbs. You said you're biased, but there must be a reason. Natalie sat back, wiping sweat from her forehead. My husband and I used to have a garden at our house. Nothing fancy, just a little plot in the backyard. He wasn't very good at it, kept forgetting to water things, but he tried. She smiled at the memory, bittersweet. After he died, I couldn't stand looking at it. I let everything die. But then I couldn't stand that either, the emptiness. So I started coming here instead. Fresh start, I guess. She hadn't meant to say so much, hadn't meant to mention Marcus at all. But Daniel's expression didn't change to that awful pitying look she had come to dread. Instead, he nodded slowly like he understood completely. My wife died 2 years ago, he said, his voice rough. Cancer. She fought for 18 months, and I thought I was prepared for the end, but you can never really prepare for something like that. Natalie's chest tightened. No, you can't. Everyone kept telling me time would heal it. That I needed to get back out there, live my life, honor her memory by being happy. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. As if I could just flip a switch and stop feeling like half of me is missing. People mean well, Natalie said softly, but they don't get it unless they've been there. No, they don't. Daniel looked at her, and in his eyes she saw her own pain reflected back. How did your husband die, if you don't mind me asking? Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light. She had said those words so many times they should have felt rehearsed, but they still caught in her throat. He died instantly. They told me he didn't feel anything, like that was supposed to make it better. God, Natalie, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about your wife. They sat there in the dirt, two broken people who had stumbled into each other's orbit by chance, and for the first time in years, Natalie didn't feel quite so alone. The sun was high in the sky now, warming her shoulders, and around them the garden hummed with life. Bees buzzed between flowers, birds sang in the trees at the edge of the property, and somewhere nearby someone was running a lawn mower. You come here every day? Daniel asked. Most days. It helps. Can I come back tomorrow? I probably need to water these, right? Natalie felt something flutter in her chest, something she couldn't quite name. Actually, bulbs don't need much water right after planting, but you should check on them in a few days, make sure the soil hasn't dried out completely. Can I check on them tomorrow anyway? His gaze was steady, hopeful in a way that looked unpracticed, like he had forgotten how to hope and was trying to remember. Yes, Natalie said, and then, before she could second-guess herself, I'll be here around 8 if you want company." Daniel's smile was small but genuine. "I'd like that." She left the garden that day feeling lighter than she had in months, and when she got home to her quiet house, she didn't immediately sink into the familiar heaviness. Instead, she made herself lunch, worked on a logo design for a local bakery, and found herself thinking about tomorrow. About Daniel and his kind eyes, and the way he understood without her having to explain. It felt dangerous and thrilling and terrifying all at once. That night, she dreamed about Marcus for the first time in weeks. In the dream, he was sitting in their old kitchen, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper like he used to every morning. She sat across from him, and he looked up and smiled. "It's okay, Nat," he said. "You're allowed to be happy." She woke with tears on her face but didn't feel sad. Instead, she felt something close to permission. Daniel was already at the garden when she arrived the next morning, standing at his plot with 2 cups of coffee in hand. He held one out to her. "I didn't know how you take it, so I brought sugar and cream packets." "Black is fine," Natalie said, accepting the cup. "Thank you. Thank you for yesterday, for helping me." He looked at the plot they had planted together, and there was something peaceful in his expression. "I didn't think I'd care about gardening, but I actually slept better last night than I have in months." "There's something calming about working with soil," Natalie said. "About creating life instead of dwelling on death." They fell into an easy routine. Daniel would show up every morning around 8, always with coffee, and they would work in their adjacent plots, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his wife, Catherine, who had been a teacher and loved mystery novels and could never resist rescuing stray cats. Natalie told him about Marcus, who had been an accountant with a terrible sense of humor and a secret talent for making pancakes shaped like animals. It took a week before Natalie learned exactly who Daniel Lawson was. She was at the grocery store, waiting in line to check out, when she saw a business magazine on the rack. Daniel's face stared back at her from the cover, serious and professional in a suit, nothing like the man she had been spending her mornings with. The headline read, "Lawson Industries CEO returns to work after personal tragedy." She bought the magazine and read the article in her car. Daniel Lawson, billionaire founder of one of the country's largest sustainable energy companies, had taken a 2-year leave of absence after his wife's death. The article was sympathetic, but also speculative, wondering if he still had the drive that had made him successful, if grief had softened his competitive edge. There were quotes from business rivals, from board members, from people who claimed to know him but probably didn't know him at all. Natalie sat there in the parking lot, staring at the glossy photo, trying to reconcile this powerful businessman with the man who got dirt under his fingernails and asked her advice about whether marigolds would work in partial shade. He hadn't told her. He had introduced himself as just Daniel, had never mentioned his company or his wealth beyond that black credit card and nice clothes. She didn't mention it the next morning. If he wanted to be just Daniel in the garden, she could give him that. God knew she understood the desire to be seen as a whole person rather than defined by a single tragedy. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and then Daniel said, "You want to get breakfast after this? There's a diner a few blocks away that supposedly makes incredible pancakes." Natalie's heart did something complicated. This felt like more than their garden friendship, felt like a step towards something she wasn't sure she was ready for. But when she looked at Daniel, with his hopeful expression and messy hair, she found herself nodding. "Okay. Yes." The diner was a small, cheerful place with red vinyl booths and a waitress who called everyone honey. They slid into a booth by the window, and Natalie ordered blueberry pancakes while Daniel got an omelet. The conversation flowed as easily as it did in the garden, and Natalie realized with a start that she was enjoying herself. Actually, genuinely enjoying herself in a way she hadn't since before Marcus died. "I saw your picture," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "On a magazine cover at the store, Lawson Industries." Daniel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully. "Ah, I wondered when you'd figure it out. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you didn't treat me like a billionaire CEO. You treated me like a guy who didn't know the first thing about gardening and needed help." He met her eyes. "Do you know how rare that is? People either want something from me or they're intimidated by me. You just wanted to help me plant flowers." "I still just want to help you plant flowers," Natalie said softly. "The rest of it doesn't matter to me, I know. That's why I didn't say anything." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry, I should have been honest. You were honest about the things that matter." She reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. "The garden is a place where we can both just be ourselves. I understand that better than you probably realize." Relief washed over his face. "So we're okay. We're okay." They lingered over breakfast, ordering more coffee, neither of them in a hurry to leave. Daniel told her about his work, how he had built his company from nothing, driven by a passion for environmental sustainability and a stubborn refusal to accept that clean energy couldn't be profitable. Catherine had believed in him from the beginning, had supported him through the long hours and risky decisions. When she got sick, he had walked away from it all without a second thought. "I've been back for 3 months," he said. "Everyone keeps asking if I'm ready, if I've still got it. Honestly, I don't know. The company runs fine without me, better than fine, actually. My team is incredible. I keep wondering what I'm even doing there." "What do you want to be doing?" Natalie asked. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "I want to figure out who I am now, after everything. I want to find a reason to get up in the morning that isn't just going through the motions." "Have you found one?" "I'm starting to." The way he looked at her made her breath catch. They started seeing each other outside the garden after that. Coffee turned into lunch, which turned into dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant where Daniel knew the owner, and they sat in a corner booth and talked until the staff started stacking chairs. He took her to an art gallery opening because she mentioned loving contemporary art, and she brought him to a botanical garden an hour away because he had become genuinely fascinated with plants. It wasn't dating, exactly. Neither of them called it that. It was two lonely people finding comfort in each other's company, finding reasons to smile again. But Natalie couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach when she saw Daniel waiting for her at the garden, or the way her heart raced when their hands accidentally brushed while they were working. 2 months into their friendship, Daniel invited her to his house. "I want to show you something," he said. "If you're comfortable coming over." His home was stunning, a modern masterpiece of glass and steel nestled in the hills overlooking the city, but what took her breath away was the backyard. Or rather, the complete lack of one. It was all concrete and stone, beautiful in its architecture but utterly lifeless. "Catherine and I bought this place right before she got diagnosed," Daniel said, standing beside Natalie on the back patio. "We had all these plans to landscape it, to put in a pool and a garden and a place where we could sit and watch the sunset. We never got the chance." "It's a beautiful space," Natalie said carefully. "It's empty." He turned to her. "I want to change that. I want to build something living here, something that grows. Will you help me design it?" This felt significant, like he was asking for more than just gardening advice. Natalie looked at the blank canvas of his yard and felt possibility humming under her skin. "Yes," she said. "I'd love to." They spent weeks planning it. Natalie drew up designs, researching plants that would thrive in his yard's microclimate, planning beds and pathways and a small water feature. Daniel was involved in every decision, and watching his enthusiasm grow was like watching someone come back to life. He smiled more, laughed more, and sometimes when he looked at her, Natalie felt the air between them crackle with something unspoken. The guilt came in waves. She would be laughing at something Daniel said, genuinely happy, and then she would remember Marcus and feel like she was betraying his memory. How could she be falling for someone else when her husband had been the love of her life? How could she even think about moving forward when part of her was still stuck in that hospital room 3 years ago, hearing the doctor say they had done everything they could? She was quiet one morning at the garden, lost in her thoughts, and Daniel noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Natalie said automatically, then stopped. "Actually, that's not true. I feel guilty." "About what?" "About this, us, whatever this is." She gestured between them helplessly. "About feeling happy when Marcus isn't here to be happy with me. About looking forward to seeing you every morning when I should still be mourning my husband." Daniel set down his trowel and came to sit beside her on the edge of his garden bed. "Can I tell you something Catherine said to me, right before she died?" Natalie nodded, her throat tight. "She made me promise not to stop living. She said she didn't want me to spend the rest of my life in mourning, that she wanted me to find joy again, even if it was with someone else." His voice cracked. "I told her I couldn't imagine ever loving anyone else, and she said that was okay, that I didn't have to force it. But if it happened naturally, if someone came into my life and made me want to try again, I should let myself try." Tears spilled down Natalie's cheeks. Marcus used to joke about it. He'd say if anything ever happened to him, I wasn't allowed to become one of those widows who wore black for the rest of her life and kept a shrine to him in the living room. He said he wanted me to be happy, to really live. "So maybe," Daniel said gently, taking her hand, "we honor them by doing exactly that, by choosing to live instead of just existing, by letting ourselves feel things again, even when it's scary." "I'm terrified," Natalie whispered. "I'm terrified of caring about you and losing you too. I don't think I could survive that again." "I'm terrified too." Daniel squeezed her hand. "But I'm more terrified of never feeling anything real again, of going through life numb just because it's safer. You make me feel alive, Natalie. For the first time in 2 years, I wake up and actually want to face the day because I know I'm going to see you." "You make me feel alive too," she admitted. "And that's exactly what scares me." "Then let's be scared together." He reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. "We don't have to rush this. We don't have to call it anything or put pressure on it. We can just keep showing up for each other and see where it goes." Natalie leaned into his touch, letting herself have this moment of comfort. "Okay," she said. "We'll take it slow." But slow was harder than she anticipated because her feelings for Daniel weren't slow. They were a wildfire, consuming her defenses, burning through the walls she had built around her heart. She found herself thinking about him constantly, analyzing every word and gesture, wondering if he felt the same magnetic pull she did. The day everything changed started ordinarily enough. They were at Daniel's house, supervising the landscaping crew he had hired to implement Natalie's design. The yard was being transformed, earth being moved, plants being positioned, and Natalie felt a deep satisfaction watching her vision come to life. Daniel stood beside her, his hand resting casually on her lower back, and she found herself leaning into him without thinking. "This is incredible," Daniel said, watching as workers installed the water feature. "You're incredibly talented, you know that." "I just like plants," Natalie said, deflecting. "No, it's more than that. You have an eye for design, for creating spaces that feel alive and welcoming." He turned to face her fully. Have you ever thought about doing this professionally, landscape design? I'm a graphic designer. I do logos and websites. You could do both, or you could do this instead if you wanted to. He gestured to the yard. I know at least a dozen people who would pay ridiculous amounts of money for you to design their gardens. I could make introductions. Natalie felt a spark of excitement. Are you serious? Completely. You have a gift, Natalie. Don't hide it in a community garden plot. She had never thought about landscape design as a career, but as she looked at the transformation happening in Daniel's yard, she felt something click into place. Maybe this was what she was meant to be doing. Maybe all those hours in the garden hadn't just been about healing, but about discovering a new path forward. That evening, after the crew left, Daniel ordered dinner from his favorite Thai restaurant, and they ate on his back patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The new garden was half finished, raw earth and scattered plants, but Natalie could see what it would become. Beautiful and alive and full of possibility. Thank you, Daniel said suddenly, for all of this, for helping me create something good. Thank you for trusting me with your space, Natalie replied. They were sitting close on the patio love seat, their knees touching, and Natalie was hyper-aware of every point of contact between them. The air felt charged, heavy with everything unsaid. Daniel set down his plate and turned to face her. Natalie, I need to tell you something. Her heart hammered. Okay, I'm falling for you. The words came out rough, almost painful. I know we said we'd take it slow, and I know we're both still healing, but I can't keep pretending this is just friendship. You're the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I think about before I sleep. When I'm at work, I count the hours until I can see you again. And I know that might be too much too soon, but I can't hold it in anymore. Natalie felt like she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at this man who had somehow become essential to her existence. I'm falling for you too, she said, her voice shaking. I've been falling for you since that first day in the garden, and it terrifies me because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to love someone new without feeling like I'm erasing what I had before. You're not erasing anything. Daniel cupped her face in his hands. Marcus will always be part of your story. Catherine will always be part of mine. But that doesn't mean we can't write new chapters. I want to write new chapters with you, Natalie whispered. He kissed her then, soft and tentative, a question rather than a demand. Natalie answered by kissing him back, threading her fingers through his hair, letting herself fall into the moment. It felt different than kissing Marcus, but that was okay. This was Daniel, and he was his own person, and she was allowed to feel new things without guilt. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. Stay tonight, he said. Not for anything except to stay. I don't want to be alone, and I don't think you want to be either. Natalie didn't. She stayed, and they talked until late into the night, lying on his couch with her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. They talked about their spouses, about the good memories and the painful ones, about learning to carry grief without letting it define them. They talked about hopes for the future, tentative and fragile as new seedlings but real nonetheless. She fell asleep there, safe in his arms, and when she woke in the morning to find him watching her with soft eyes, she didn't feel afraid. She felt hopeful. They officially started dating after that, though they kept it relatively private. Daniel didn't want the media scrutiny that would come if people knew he was seeing someone, and Natalie didn't want the pressure of being the billionaire's girlfriend in the public eye. For now, this was theirs, something precious and private. Natalie met Daniel's sister, Jessica, at a family dinner 3 weeks later. She was nervous about it, worried that Jessica would see her as an interloper, but the petite blonde woman pulled her into a hug the moment she walked through the door. "Thank you," Jessica said fiercely. "Thank you for bringing my brother back to life. I've been so worried about him." "I didn't do anything," Natalie protested. "You did everything." Jessica pulled back, her eyes shining. "He's smiling again, really smiling. I haven't seen that in 2 years." Dinner was warm and welcoming, filled with laughter and easy conversation. Jessica's husband, Paul, was a contractor with a great sense of humor, and their 2 kids, 9-year-old Emma and 7-year-old Tyler, were delightful. Watching Daniel with his niece and nephew, patient and playful, made Natalie's heart ache in the best possible way. He would be a wonderful father someday if that was something he wanted. "You want kids?" she asked him later that night, lying in her bed together. He had been staying over more often, and she had started keeping some of his clothes in her closet. "I do," Daniel said, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "Catherine and I were going to start trying right before she got diagnosed. What about you?" "Marcus and I talked about it, but we were going to wait a few more years. I always thought I'd be a mom eventually." She paused. "I'm 32. I don't know how much time I have left if I want that." "You have time," Daniel assured her. "And for what it's worth, I think you'd be an amazing mother." The thought of having children with Daniel, of building a family together, felt both impossibly far away and tantalizingly close. They had only been together for a few months, but Natalie couldn't imagine her future without him in it. He had become her partner, her best friend, the person she wanted to share everything with. Daniel's family embraced her, but introducing Daniel to her parents was more complicated. Her mother had been worried about her for years, constantly trying to set her up on dates or suggesting grief counseling or gently implying that she needed to move on. When Natalie called to tell her about Daniel, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You're dating someone." Her mother, Patricia, finally said, "Yes, his name is Daniel and he's wonderful. How long has this been going on?" "A few months." Another pause. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I knew you'd make it a big deal," Natalie thought. Out loud, she said, "I wanted to make sure it was serious first." "And is it serious?" "Very." Natalie took a breath. "Mom, I really care about him. I'd like you to meet him." The dinner with her parents was tense at first. Her father, Robert, was protective and skeptical, and her mother kept studying Daniel like he was a puzzle to solve. But Daniel was charming and genuine, answering their questions honestly, not trying to impress them but simply being himself. When he talked about how he and Natalie had met, how they had both been struggling with loss and found comfort in each other, Patricia's expression softened. "You make her happy," her mother said to Daniel as they were clearing plates after dinner. Natalie was in the other room with her father, and Patricia had cornered Daniel in the kitchen. "I can see it in her eyes. She lights up when she looks at you." "She makes me happy too," Daniel said simply. "I love your daughter, Mrs. Rivers. I know it's fast, but I know what I feel." Patricia studied him for another moment, then nodded. "Good. She deserves to be loved well, just don't hurt her. She's been through enough." "I won't," Daniel promised. "Not if I can help it." When Natalie and Daniel left that night, her mother pulled her aside. "He's good for you," she said, hugging Natalie tight. "Marcus would approve." The words made Natalie cry, but they were healing tears. Her mother was right. Marcus, who had loved her fiercely and wanted her happiness above all else, would have liked Daniel. Would have been glad she had found someone who treated her like she was precious. As fall turned to winter, Daniel's garden reached completion. The space that had been barren concrete was now a lush oasis, with stone pathways winding between planted beds, a burbling fountain as the centerpiece, and even a small greenhouse tucked in one corner. Daniel threw a party to celebrate, inviting friends and family and business associates, and Natalie stood beside him as he gave a speech thanking everyone for coming. "This garden represents something important to me," Daniel said, his hand finding Natalie's. "It represents growth and new beginnings. It represents the fact that even in the darkest times, we can create beauty. And I owe it all to the incredible woman beside me, who taught me that it's okay to plant seeds even when you're not sure you'll be around to see them bloom." People applauded, and Natalie felt her cheeks flush. Later, as guests mingled and explored the garden, Jessica pulled her aside. "He's going to propose," she said without preamble. "Just so you know, he asked Paul and me for advice on rings last week." Natalie's heart stopped. "What?" "Don't act surprised when he does it," Jessica advised. "And for the record, I think you're perfect for him. Welcome to the family, officially." Natalie spent the next 2 weeks in a state of nervous anticipation. Every time Daniel took her somewhere nice or acted particularly romantic, she braced herself. But the proposal didn't come. Instead, Daniel seemed to be waiting for something, though she couldn't figure out what. The answer came on a cold December morning at the community garden. They had kept their plots there even though Daniel now had his beautiful yard, because this place was special to them. This was where everything had started. "Come here," Daniel said, gesturing her over to his plot. "I want to show you something." The bulbs they had planted that first day together had long since bloomed and gone dormant, but now there was something new. A small wooden sign staked in the earth, carved with careful letters. "Will you marry me?" Natalie turned to find Daniel on one knee, holding out a ring box. The ring inside was beautiful, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, classic but unique. "I thought about doing this at a fancy restaurant or on some romantic getaway," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "But this is where we met. This is where we both started learning to live again. It felt right to ask you here, in the place where you taught me that growing things isn't just about the destination, but about the journey." He took a shaky breath. "Natalie Rivers, I love you more than I thought I could ever love again. You brought light back into my life when I was convinced I would spend the rest of my days in darkness. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Natalie said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that felt like a promise. Around them, the garden slept beneath winter's touch, but Natalie knew that come spring, everything would bloom again. Just like her heart had bloomed when she found Daniel, just like their love had bloomed from shared grief into shared joy. They decided on a spring wedding, wanting to give themselves time to plan, but not wanting to wait too long. Natalie threw herself into wedding preparations while also launching her new landscape design business. Daniel had been right about his connections. She suddenly had more clients than she knew what to do with, wealthy people who wanted beautiful outdoor spaces and didn't mind paying well for expertise. She hired an assistant, rented a small office, and discovered that she loved this work in a way she had never loved graphic design. Daniel, meanwhile, found new energy for his company. He was still passionate about sustainable energy, but now he was also passionate about living a balanced life. He delegated more, trusted his team, and made sure to leave work at reasonable hours so he could have dinner with Natalie and help her review landscape plans. The business magazines that had questioned his commitment now wrote glowing profiles about his renewed focus and the company's record-breaking year. "I think I needed to fall apart before I could build myself back better," Daniel told Natalie one evening. They were at his house, their house really since she had unofficially moved in, sitting in the garden they had created together. "Catherine's death broke me, but it also showed me what really matters. Success isn't about working yourself to death. It's about building a life worth living. I think Marcus's death did the same for me," Natalie said softly. "It's a terrible way to learn a lesson, but maybe we needed it. Maybe we needed to lose everything to understand what we really want." "And what do you really want?" "This." She gestured between them, at the garden around them, at the life they were building. "You, a family someday, work that fulfills me, friends and laughter and all the messy, beautiful parts of being alive." She smiled. "I spent 3 years existing but not living. I don't want to waste any more time." "Then we won't," Daniel said, pulling her close. "We'll live so fully that it makes up for the time we lost." The wedding took place on a perfect April afternoon in the botanical garden where they had visited on one of their early dates. The venue was bursting with spring blooms, tulips and daffodils and cherry blossoms creating a riot of color. Natalie wore a simple ivory dress that made her feel beautiful without being overstated, and Daniel looked impossibly handsome in a dark gray suit. Natalie's parents were there, along with her younger brother and his family. Daniel's sister Jessica was the maid of honor, and Paul was the best man. Friends from the community garden came, along with colleagues from both their professional lives, and even some of the clients Natalie had worked with. It was a small wedding by Billionaire standards, maybe 80 people, but it felt perfect. As Natalie walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she saw Daniel waiting for her at the altar, and the look on his face made her breath catch. Pure love, pure joy, and underneath it all, a gratitude that mirrored her own. They had both been given a second chance at happiness, and they weren't taking it for granted. The ceremony was short and heartfelt. They had written their own vows, and when it was Daniel's turn, his voice was steady despite the tears in his eyes. "Natalie, you found me when I was lost. You didn't try to fix me or rush me through my grief. You just sat beside me in the dirt and helped me plant flowers, and somehow that was exactly what I needed. You taught me that healing isn't linear, that it's okay to have bad days, and that growing something beautiful can be an act of hope even when hope feels impossible. I promise to love you fiercely and gently, to support your dreams, to be your partner in every sense of the word. I promise to keep planting flowers with you, literally and metaphorically, for the rest of our lives." By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Natalie took a shaky breath before starting her own vows. "Daniel, you gave me permission to live again. You showed me that loving someone new doesn't mean forgetting someone old, that the heart has an infinite capacity for love if we're brave enough to let it. You made me laugh when I had forgotten how, made me dream about the future when I thought I had lost my future. I promise to be your safe place, your biggest cheerleader, your partner in building a life that honors where we've been while embracing where we're going. I promise to choose joy with you every single day." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife and Daniel kissed her, Natalie felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. This wasn't the life she had imagined 10 years ago when she married Marcus, but it was a good life, a beautiful life, a life worth living. The reception was held in a glass pavilion overlooking the gardens, with dinner and dancing and toasts that were both funny and touching. Jessica told stories about Daniel as a kid, and Natalie's brother embarrassed her with tales from their teenage years. Daniel's business partner gave a speech about how love had made Daniel a better leader, more empathetic and grounded. Patricia cried through her entire speech about watching her daughter find happiness again. As the evening wore on and the party continued around them, Daniel pulled Natalie onto the dance floor for a slow song. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling completely content. "Happy," he murmured into her hair. "Incredibly," Natalie said. "You, more than I ever thought I'd be again." He pulled back to look at her. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, on us. Thank you for being worth the risk. They honeymooned in New Zealand, spending 2 weeks exploring the country's stunning landscapes. Natalie took hundreds of photos of the gardens they visited, already imagining design ideas she could incorporate into future projects. Daniel dragged her on hikes through mountains and along coastlines, and at night they talked about their plans for the future. "I want kids," Daniel said one evening as they sat on the balcony of their hotel room watching the sunset over the ocean. "Sooner rather than later. Is that okay?" "It's more than okay," Natalie said, her heart full. "I want that too." "How many?" "At least 2. I don't want an only child." "What about you?" 2 or 3 sounds perfect, he grinned. "Think we can handle it?" "We can handle anything together," Natalie said confidently. When they returned home, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Daniel had officially asked Natalie to move into his house months ago, and she had sold her smaller place. They designated one of the spare bedrooms as her office for her landscape business, and another became a project room where they could work on things together. The master suite they made their own, balancing Daniel's modern aesthetic with Natalie's softer touches. Natalie got pregnant 4 months after the wedding. When she saw the positive test, she sat on the bathroom floor and cried, overwhelmed by emotion. This was happening. She was going to be a mother. She was going to have a baby with Daniel, and it felt like the final piece of her new life clicking into place. Daniel's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "We're having a baby," he kept saying. "We're actually having a baby." They told their families right away, unable to keep the secret. Jessica screamed with excitement and immediately started planning the baby shower. Patricia cried happy tears and started knitting blankets. Robert pulled Daniel aside and had a serious conversation about the responsibility of fatherhood, which ended with them hugging and Robert welcoming him to the next phase of life. The pregnancy was mostly smooth. Natalie had morning sickness in the first trimester and exhaustion that made her fall asleep at her desk, but Daniel was attentive and supportive. He went to every doctor's appointment, read every baby book, and turned one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery with the same intensity he brought to his business deals. They learned they were having a girl at the 20-week ultrasound, and Natalie saw Daniel fall in love in real time. "A daughter," he whispered, staring at the screen. "We're having a daughter, Catherine Elizabeth," Natalie said softly. "If that's okay with you, to honor your wife." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "You do that. She was important to you, and part of your story is part of our story now. I want our daughter to know about the strong woman her father loved before me." Natalie squeezed his hand. "Plus, I think Catherine would have been an amazing mother. It feels right to name our baby after her." "I love you so much," Daniel said, and they held each other while the ultrasound tech discreetly left the room to give them privacy. As Natalie's belly grew, so did her business. She hired 2 more employees and started turning down clients because she was too busy. She specialized in residential gardens that incorporated sustainable practices, creating beautiful spaces that also supported local ecosystems. Several of her designs had been featured in magazines, and she had gained a reputation as one of the area's top landscape designers. "I'm so proud of you," Daniel said one evening, watching her review plans for a new project. "You've built something incredible." "We've both built incredible things," Natalie said, placing his hand on her belly where their daughter was kicking, "including this little one." Catherine Elizabeth Lawson arrived on a rainy October morning, 3 days before her due date. Labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Natalie thought she couldn't do it, but Daniel never left her side. He held her hand, coached her breathing, and told her how strong she was until finally, Their daughter entered the world with a loud cry that made them both laugh through their tears. "She's perfect," Daniel said, holding the tiny bundle carefully, like she might break. "She's absolutely perfect." Natalie watched her husband with their daughter and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. This was her family. This was the life she had built from the ashes of her grief, and it was more beautiful than anything she had imagined. The first few months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Catherine was a fussy baby who didn't sleep well, and there were nights when Natalie and Daniel were both zombies, functioning on 2 hours of sleep and way too much coffee. But there were also moments of pure magic. Catherine's first smile, the way she gripped Daniel's finger with her tiny hand, the peaceful weight of her sleeping on Natalie's chest. "We should have another one," Daniel said one morning when Catherine was 8 months old. They had finally gotten a full night's sleep, and he was feeling optimistic. Natalie threw a burp cloth at him. "Ask me again when this one is sleeping through the night consistently." But she wasn't opposed to the idea. Despite the exhaustion, she loved being a mother. She loved watching Daniel be a father, loved the family they were creating together. When Catherine was a year old and life had settled into more of a routine, they started trying for baby number 2. Their son, Marcus Daniel, was born 2 years after his sister, an easy pregnancy and an even easier delivery. He was a calm, happy baby who slept well and smiled at everyone, the perfect complement to his dramatic, demanding sister. Natalie held him in the hospital and felt complete. "Marcus and Catherine," she whispered, "our past and our future all together." Daniel kissed her forehead. "All the people we love, represented in the people we made. It's perfect." As their children grew, Daniel and Natalie made sure to keep their own relationship strong. They had date nights, took weekend trips without the kids, and maintained the community garden plots where they had first met. Every year on the anniversary of that day, they went to the garden early in the morning and planted something new together, a tradition that grounded them. "Do you ever think about how different life would be if we hadn't met?" Daniel asked one morning at the garden. Catherine was 5 and Marcus was 3, both entertaining themselves by helping plant seeds. "All the time," Natalie admitted. "I think I would have been stuck. Existing but not really living. I'm so grateful your sister bullied you into getting that garden plot. I'm grateful you were kind to a stranger who didn't know anything about gardening." He watched their children for a moment, their faces dirt-smudged and happy. "I'm grateful for all of it, even the hard parts, even the grief and the loss, because it brought us here." "Me too," Natalie said, leaning into him. "I wouldn't change a thing." Years passed in the beautiful, messy way that time does when you're busy living. Daniel's company continued to thrive, and he became a vocal advocate for work-life balance in the corporate world, often giving talks about how personal tragedy had refocused his priorities. Natalie's landscape design business expanded into commercial projects, and she designed the grounds for several public buildings, including a hospital garden specifically for patients and families dealing with loss. Catherine grew into a confident, artistic 7-year-old who loved drawing and soccer. Marcus at 5 was quieter but intensely curious, always asking questions about how things worked. They were good kids, and Daniel and Natalie worked hard to raise them with strong values and an understanding that they were incredibly privileged. "We should tell them," Natalie said one evening after the kids were in bed. "About Marcus and Catherine, about where their names come from." "They're still pretty young," Daniel said carefully. "I know, but I don't want it to be this big secret that gets revealed later. I want them to grow up knowing that families can be complicated and beautiful at the same time." She curled up next to him on the couch. "And I want them to know that love doesn't diminish, that we can love their namesakes and still love each other and them completely. So they sat their children down and told them the truth in age-appropriate terms. That mommy had been married before to a wonderful man named Marcus who died in an accident. That daddy had been married before to a wonderful woman named Catherine who got very sick and died. That they had been very sad for a long time, but then they found each other and learned to be happy again. "Are you still sad sometimes?" Catherine asked with a 7-year-old's directness. "Sometimes," Natalie admitted. "It's okay to be sad about losing someone you love even if you're happy now. Both feelings can exist at the same time." "Do you think the other Marcus and the other Catherine would like us?" Marcus asked shyly. "They would love you," Daniel said firmly. "We named you after them because they were special people and you're special too. You carry their names and that's an honor." The conversation led to others, ongoing discussions about grief and loss and love. When Catherine's friend's grandmother died a year later and she came home crying, Natalie and Daniel were able to help her process the feelings because they had been honest about their own experiences. When Marcus asked if people who died could see them from heaven, they gave him an honest answer. They didn't know for sure, but they liked to think so. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Daniel surprised Natalie with a weekend getaway to a luxury resort, just the two of them. His sister watched the kids, and for 48 hours they got to be just Daniel and Natalie, not mom and dad, not business owners, just themselves. 10 years, Natalie said, sitting with him on a private beach at sunset. "Can you believe it? Best 10 years of my life," Daniel said. "And I include the sleepless nights and the tantrums and the time Marcus decided to paint the dog." Natalie laughed. "That was a memorable day." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for being exactly the partner I needed, for building this life with me. Thank you for taking a chance on a broken man in a garden." He kissed the top of her head. "You saved me, Natalie, you and this beautiful life we've created." "We saved each other," she corrected. "That's what love does." They watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Natalie thought about how far they had both come. From grief to joy, from loneliness to family, from barely surviving to fully thriving. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when she thought the pain would never fade. But she had kept showing up, kept trying, kept choosing to live rather than just exist. And then she had met Daniel, another person who understood what it was like to lose everything and have to rebuild. Together, they had taught each other that it was possible to love again, to hope again, to believe in happiness again. They had planted literal and metaphorical gardens, creating life and beauty in spaces that had been empty. Their children were living proof that joy could grow from sorrow, that endings could lead to new beginnings. Catherine and Marcus, named for the people who had loved Daniel and Natalie first, loved by the people who had learned to love again. As they walked back to their room, hand in hand, Natalie felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. For the community garden where she had met a lost man who needed help planting bulbs. For the slow building of friendship into something more. For the courage they had both found to risk their hearts again. She had learned that grief doesn't disappear, but it transforms. It becomes part of your story, part of who you are, but it doesn't have to be the whole story. There's room for new chapters, new love, new joy. You just have to be brave enough to keep turning the pages. Later that night, lying in bed with Daniel's arms around her, Natalie thought about the future. About watching their children grow up, about growing old together, about all the moments big and small that would make up their shared life. About the gardens they would plant and the memories they would create. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel murmured sleepily. "Everything," Natalie said. "The past, the present, the future. How grateful I am for all of it. Even the hard parts, they made me who I am. They brought me to you." She turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Daniel Lawson, today, tomorrow, always. I love you too, Natalie Lawson." He kissed her softly. "Thank you for teaching me how to love again." "Thank you for teaching me," she replied. And as they fell asleep together, Natalie knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The journey from widow to wife, from grief to joy, from broken to whole, had been long and difficult. But it had been worth every painful step, because it had led her to this man, this family, this life bursting with love and possibility. She had learned that the heart is resilient, that happiness can bloom even in the darkest soil, and that sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow in places you never expected. All you have to do is show up, be brave, and trust that seeds planted in sorrow can blossom into joy beyond measure. Their story had begun in a community garden on a September morning. Two broken people finding comfort in dirt and bulbs and shared understanding. It had grown into something beautiful and lasting, something that honored their pasts while embracing their future. And as Natalie drifted off to sleep, she knew that their garden was still growing, still blooming, and would continue to do so for all the years to come. Because love, real love, doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms, it multiplies, it finds new ways to express itself. Marcus would always be part of Natalie's story, just as Catherine would always be part of Daniel's. But that didn't prevent new love from growing, new families from forming, new happiness from taking root. In the end, Natalie and Daniel had given each other the greatest gift possible: permission to live fully again, to embrace joy without guilt, to believe in second chances. They had taught each other that loving again wasn't a betrayal of the past, but an honoring of it, a testament to the capacity of the human heart to heal and expand and love without limits. And that lesson, that beautiful, hard-won understanding, was something they would carry with them forever and pass on to their children. Because everyone deserves to know that even in the wake of devastating loss, life goes on. Gardens grow. Love blooms. Hope returns. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone who understands your scars and loves you not despite them, but because they're part of what makes you who you are. That was the gift Daniel and Natalie had given each other, standing side by side in a garden, planting bulbs that would bloom in spring. The gift of second chances, of new beginnings, of love that honors the past while embracing the future. And in giving that gift to each other, they had discovered that the heart truly does have infinite capacity for love, if only we're brave enough to let it grow.